Cool. Well, welcome to the show, everyone, today. My guest is Glenn Rogers. He's the founder and CEO of Float, which is a resource scheduling app that helps agencies, studios, and firms keep track of who's doing what, when. In 2012, Glenn was working for an ad agency in New York City and noticed that a lot of agencies were using spreadsheets to manage 300 plus person teams and thought there must be a better way. At this point, the idea for Float was born, and over the next few years, Glenn worked on the business as a side project on nights and weekends. Today, they're profitable and bootstrapped with a 100% remote team around the world and are serving over 2,000 customers, including NASA, Deloitte, and Vice, to name a few. I wanted to bring Glenn on the show to find out how he launched and grew Float, how he manages a fully remote team, and what he's learned from growing the business without raising any money. So, Glenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. Great intro. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, I wanted to get a bit of a sense of your background and your story. So, could you just tell us where you grew up, what you were doing before Float, and how you ended up in New York City?
Not a problem. So yeah, look, I'm Melbourne born. I grew up around these parts where I am now here in Collingwood, and about 9 years ago now, well, a little before that, backpacked through New York, and I said, look, one day I've got to live in this place. It's an incredible city. For anyone that's been there, they know what I mean. And so my career was in advertising predominantly. I did advertising in university, and then went straight into ad agencies shortly after. And there you kind of learn a lot about how to build products or campaigns for other clients, but you're not doing a lot of that yourself. You're learning a lot about how other clients move. Anyway, enjoyed that. You do such a variety of work, and fortunately was quite an employable role in New York. I think in New York you're either an accountant or advertising. It seems to be when you're an Aussie going to New York, and I was in advertising. So fortunately, I moved over there in 2009. It was a terrible time to move there. It was no one was hiring. It was bottoming out, the economy, and fortunately, a little ad agency down in Tribeca called Fantasy Interactive hired me as a producer, and was able to work with just incredible people, incredibly talented designers, developers, and other producers. Did some great work. And that was sort of my leap into New York. And once you're there, once you have a visa, it actually is a little easy to move around after that. And the economy picked up, and then moved to another agency there called Razorfish. Worked there for around 4 years, and that's where I learned the craft and really worked my way up, both on the producing side, so producing large scale projects for clients like Unilever. And then also on the account side, so really starting to understand the numbers, how agencies are running, how they're profitable, and how to run a business. And that was a great formula. I encourage anyone to work in advertising to figure that out. And at that stage was where as you mentioned, I really discovered that pain point that not only were people trying to be managed across hundreds of projects, across hundreds of different different skill sets and locations and types of. They were doing this all via a spreadsheet. And this was a thread that I noticed back in Melbourne. It was a thread I noticed at that little agency in Tribeca. But to see it at this scale was incredible. And seeing that there was one role at Razorfish that was hired specifically to manage this spreadsheet, I thought in 2012, there had to be a better way. Everyone was moving to the cloud. You saw the success stories of guys like Basecamp, proving the SaaS model was working and that it made sense. At that stage, I drafted up an idea for Float, some old wireframes, shared it with one of the technical directors there at the time called Lars, and he had a similar pain point. In the times he'd worked in that area, he was on board, and the rest is history. And so we started Float back in 2012. We bootstrapped it while we kept our day jobs. I mean, certainly SaaS doesn't pay the bills from day one. It's one of those long games where when people are paying you $100 an account, $100 a month, that takes a while to pay a paycheck. So we kept our day jobs, and a few years later we're profitable. A few years later we left our day jobs, and a few years later we finished working. Those day jobs, focused on full-time work, and 2 years ago, I moved back to Melbourne to continue doing that. So here I am.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. That's a good summary of the journey so far. And it's funny because I feel like to to start a SaaS business, you just have to look at what are people using spreadsheets for in the business and then find a way to build software around that. It seems to happen a lot. So I
It
love
really is. You could mine that for a
that.
while.
Yeah. So what is Float exactly? So you obviously mentioned the origin of how it came about, but what specifically is the problem you're solving and how do you do that with Float?
So our typical audience, if you've looked at float.com, you can see it's a resource scheduling application. But what makes that special? I mean, it's really about helping agencies and consulting firms and teams that typically have to manage multiple projects at the same time, and visually managing that time with their team. And it's collaborative. It's clearly cloud-based, so it supports folks in often different locations at the same time. But it gives you a clear plan for that next 4 weeks, that next 8 weeks, on where you should be spending that time, so that designer that logs into Float or gets that email, they have a clear direction of their week, what they should be working on, what they shouldn't be working on. It takes into account things like time off. So Barry's away next week, that Sally's going to take up the design for that project. It looks at team utilization, which is very important for ad agencies. That's how they calculate profitability. It takes all those factors that are typically handled by 3 different tools or a complicated spreadsheet. It makes it visual, simple, intuitive, drag and drop, and that's why a lot of that's why it attracts a lot of those agencies that are just looking for something that is simple, fast, and efficient.
Yep, makes total sense. So you mentioned just before that you did decide to keep your day jobs and work on Float on the side. So is that something you think more people should take that approach? Because you do hear of people who kind of burn the ships and go all in on their idea, and you do hear some success stories, but it's a bit of survivorship bias of you don't hear about the 10,000 people who did end up in their mum's basement when they went broke. So do you think are you glad you sort of went about it in that way, looking back?
Absolutely. I don't think we would be where we are today unless we did do that and take that route. And to be transparent, like it wasn't completely by choice. Like many of us that start a business, we sort of look to investors and we look to accelerators. At the time, we went to the final stages of Techstars, one of the great accelerators in the US, and didn't get it in the final round. And it was somewhat a blessing, to be totally frank. Like we look back on it and smile because it was the best thing that could have happened to us. We invested our own cash early on. It was roughly $25,000. We built our first MVP with myself, Lars, Yaron, a designer, and another developer. And we launched, and we figured out that most of our assumptions were wrong, and that we were not necessarily building the right product straight away. And so trying to get to a point and understand what is your product market fit and what are the right features and functions that you can really back over time, that takes time. And that's the time we needed to keep our day jobs, keep some stability, and figure that out.
All right, so we just lost Glenn there, but we're back now. So Glenn, you were just talking about how not securing that funding, looking back from Techstars, was actually a really big blessing in disguise. So if you could just keep talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we didn't get around to funding when we started. We certainly chased it and we were unsuccessful. Well, what we realized is, look, with $25,000 invested, I think early on of our own money, it's enough. It's enough to build an MVP. It's enough to launch something. It's enough to then get some customer feedback. And I think that in of itself is exactly what you want to achieve when you launch a startup, a software startup in particular. And we learned a lot. And what you realize too is you don't nail it straight away. It takes time, and with software as a service and the industry we're in, you need to be able to iterate and continue, and that takes time. You're going to burn through a lot of cash in that time. For us, it just made total sense. We keep our day job. There's outside of the 8 hours a day at work, you got a lot of time in the evenings and weekends, and that's what we used. And we certainly burnt some hours in our nights and weekends, and that sweat equity, but it was worth it. And I look back on that and smile because I think, we got there, we continued to iterate, we found somewhat of a product market fit. And then when we were profitable and we could see a path forward, we could give up our day jobs with confidence and sleep well at night knowing that we could pay ourselves.
Yeah, that's cool. I've heard some people say that a lot of businesses fail due to over capitalization rather than under capitalization. Do you think that there's any truth to that?
Absolutely. And I know for a fact we would have made big mistakes. We would have moved, if we were forced to move fast, then we would have absolutely been forced to move fast through the investors and through the path you take, I guess, when you accept the fact that, if you have investors, they need an exit and they want a relatively fast exit, that you will move quick and break things, but often those things you break may not be recoverable. And I think that's a big problem with a lot of startups, and it would have been a problem for us. We've learned lessons all over the place. We've learned lessons with hiring the wrong people, hiring the wrong roles. We've learned issues with product scaling. So how you scale a product. As Float is now in 150 countries and accepts teams from 300 to 500 people. Learning how to scale a piece of software to support those teams takes time. So all these things that we've been learning since 2012, when we launched, are lessons we are thankful we had time to learn.
Yeah, it's great lessons learned looking back. So how did you get your first customers when you launched? Was there any particular strategies you had for getting those first initial customers? How did you sort of get the ball rolling with Float?
Yeah, so fortunately, we picked a problem that we understood really well, and I encourage anyone that is even thinking about entering into starting a business. It's a great place to start. Scratch your own itch. I developed the specifications just based clearly on what I wanted to see in an application. So I knew if I could build that I'd be solving a problem for me. And that's the start. And then for the next round, it was really about, fortunately being in New York and surrounded by other ad agencies, we could really test this out. I could literally, walk down the street and chat to my friend in another agency back, and learn from what the feedback they were providing at a very, very early age. It has a lot of benefits being in cities or being in locations where you're surrounded by your actual customers. I think that's another lesson that I'm very thankful for, was being in New York, launching a startup for ad agencies. We did a lot of testing and a lot of going out and chatting to people and maximizing every opportunity to put it in front of people. And to be honest, I wish I did it more. I think you probably trust your instinct a little too much when you're scratching your own itch like that. And there's lessons we learned years later that would have been better solved if we did a bit more user testing up front.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think you went to a lot of like tech meetups in New York, I believe, and got a bit of press in TechCrunch and some other publications. So
yeah, this was all pre-product hunt, and
yeah.
TechCrunch is the biggest thing you could do. And look, the rules haven't changed. I think we were very fortunate to get two things on launch: a write-up on TechCrunch and to present at the New York Tech Meetup, which is the largest tech meetup in the US. And it's they were huge opportunities for us, and they were done through just reaching out to folks at those organizations and really just laying it out for them and trying to do as much for them to write the article or to present to us as possible. And that's sort of a lesson I'd say to anyone looking for press or looking for a write-up, is write the article for them. Give them the lead, give them a story arc, let them know who the competitors are and the industry is and why you are different. We virtually wrote the article for them, and fortunately they were supportive and ran it. And that was again a really, really great leg up when you start, when you literally on day one have hundreds of people signing up. That's a baptism of fire in a good way.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's such a good point as well. Just if you want something from someone else, if you want press, for anything really, just remove that friction and make their job easier if you're asking of something from them, and you're more likely to get a yes for sure. It's the same with me with even this podcast, just trying to take all the friction out as much as possible with guests and making it easy for them. It really increases your chances of people agreeing to come on, so I totally get it.
Absolutely.
And so you got your first few customers, you were starting to build it, iterate, and kind of grow the platform. So where did that initial growth come from? Were you doing any sort of outbound sales, or was a lot of it just word of mouth or inbound? Like, how did you grow initially? What was your strategy there?
Yeah, look, we are a product that you require nothing but a credit card to pull out and sign up for. So, and a very low cost, very low average revenue per account. So, an average company pays us $100 a month. So, very low volume, low revenue, but we needed high volume. We needed a lot of those companies. So, for us, it was really looking at trying to get marketing out there. So doing a lot of the traditional ad buys that you do in digital, whether it be through AdWords, through the directory listings like Capterra and G2, and then looking at experimenting across, you name it. We tried it all. We've been the Twitter ads, the LinkedIn ads, the Facebook ads, the Instagram ads. We tried a bunch of things and we learned lessons. And along the way, we continued to improve our SEO ranking as well. So if you typed resource scheduling app, you'd eventually see us and really exploiting what is a niche, right? Like what I love are these little verticals you can pick off that no one's, Google ain't chasing resource scheduling app as a keyword, and Asana ain't either. So for us, it was a really great opportunity to buy those keywords at relatively competitive prices and yeah, get inbound. All our customer service is inbound. We have a few sales folks that handle the larger accounts, but for the most part, we want people coming to us in as larger numbers as possible.
Makes sense. I love it. So, was there like a single point where because at this stage you were working on your jobs for, I believe, the first 3 years of Float. So you were sort of growing and all this stuff was happening and you were still working in your day job. So what was the point where you realized you could put that aside and go all in on Float? Was there one particular moment that happened?
No, a lot of people talk about product market fit like it's a thing you wake up one day and have, and and the day before you didn't have it. It's not like that at all, and it certainly wasn't like that for me. I really had a fundamental belief in Float from day one. I thought it was a problem that needed solving, and the solution we had proposed and at least put out there as an iteration was a solution that that could really work as a business. And when you get that first sale, I still remember the first customer. It was Ogilvy Singapore. Totally someone I never knew, didn't have any association with, signing up for Float. I mean, that gave us a lot of self-confidence, right? Like there's a company and these are businesses that put their confidential data in your system. When they took a chance on us, I think that gave us a lot of self-confidence. There was something there. And from that day onwards, it's always been that way. I think, you wake up each day, you keep pushing the ball forward, and then you look back once in a while and go, hey, we've got a pretty good business here. And I think that should be the way people look at each of their startups, like each day at a time, just push the ball forward, try and do something a little bit better each day, keep grinding it out. And eventually, yeah, this business you can look back and be proud of. But I don't think it's any one light bulb moment or any one silver bullet that does it.
Absolutely. It's like with anything, I guess, like with fitness, there's not one day where you wake up and suddenly you're ripped. It just happens slowly over months and years, exactly. So yeah, I totally get that. So you've now moved back from New York City to Melbourne, which is where I am as well. So I'm curious, what was the reason for that move? Why did you? Because you did mention before that it was really helpful to be around your customers so that you could get that feedback and sort of use that and be able to walk down the road. So what was the decision? What was the reason for the decision to move?
Sure. Look, we had 7 years in New York, incredible city, and encourage anyone to spend some time there if they get the opportunity. After 7 years, it's tiring. And we're from Melbourne. We're very fortunate to call Melbourne home. As you know, it's an amazing, incredible city to grow up. No qualms in going back here and being closer to family. I've just got an 11-week-old. So we've started a family here, and that's been fantastic. But with business, I think, and particularly with SaaS business, you reach a level of scale where being in any one location is not a benefit, and in fact, it can be a disadvantage when you talk about New York and trying to hire quality engineers in New York. It's expensive. So for us, being able to look outside and take on this idea of we're going to be a 100% remote team was an opportunity. And proving that I could do that from here in Melbourne while my co-founder is in New York was another opportunity to try. And when you're also a software business that is 24/7, it actually gives you a bit of coverage, right? I'm online when our Australian customers are online, and our US team are on when our US team are online, and that's huge. I remember going to bed at night in New York and not being able to sleep because we just did a release and I wasn't sure if it was going to hold up at 3 in the morning when we had this outage and people are trying to access their schedules. So remote teams just have a lot of upside. So I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy to be running a fully remote team.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's something I'm curious about and want to ask you a few questions on, because you are a fully remote company. So you mentioned before there's like a lot of high cost, obviously, for hiring good engineers in New York. Was that one of the main reasons you wanted to be a remote company? Was it for a cost reason, or was it like a lifestyle choice? What was your main thoughts there initially?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think there's probably a couple of things at play here. I think I always built Float with the idea that it would be the business I'd want to work in and for. The fact that we have this flexibility, that we are able to, work hours that are most efficient for us, that we don't have to travel long distances to work. We work when we're most productive, and I think that's huge. And I think you're seeing this across industries where they're realizing the benefits of having a remote workforce and working, whether it be from home or co-working spaces. I think it's fast outnumbering the cons. So there was that. And then you do a lot of things out of desperation. I tell you, desperation and constraints are a wonderful thing because they force you to do things that you need to do to stay alive. And for us, it was about we need to bring on talented engineers. Talented engineers are all over the world. They just don't happen to live in New York and San Francisco. So when we discovered that, and when we started looking further out and hiring some brilliant engineers, whether it was in Ukraine or Portugal or Florida or Texas, it was a no-brainer. And we've followed that and continue to hire the best wherever they are. And I think it's a great formula for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, why restrict yourself to one geographic location? Just get the talent wherever it may be. I'm curious though, because I'm assuming there'd be quite a few challenges that come from running a fully remote company or fully remote team. So what are some of those challenges, and how do you actually address them in Float?
Yeah, it has its own challenges indeed, remote work, and I think we're all figuring it out as we go. But having said that, I think we learned a lot of lessons in the first couple of years in doing that, and certainly we look to hire relatively senior folks. So our engineers are all relatively senior, which brings with it a level of maturity and autonomy and self-management that really is important for remote work. So the ability to get up in the morning, know what you need to do and just do it and get it done. You don't need folks over your shoulder saying, look, here's what you do, A, B, and C. There's a lot of, self-management and the ability to do your work without too much guidance. So that's a big deal. Secondly, you really need to be comfortable working, in instances like this. I'm here at home. I spend probably 2 days of my week here, and it's long bursts where you're literally on your own. I think that suits some people. I embrace it, and it drives me forward. Some folks need to be in an office next to a water cooler and having those conversations day in, day out, and that's fine. And they should continue to do that and be okay with that. I think they're different types. I think you need to be careful of the folks that think, remote work, has all these pros of flexibility and fun that they want, but in reality they don't, and that's where I think we've made mistakes in the past too.
Mm. Is that just people who were they sort of not a good fit just because they couldn't work? They weren't disciplined enough to work on their own schedule. Is that kind of what you're talking about, or?
Yeah, a little bit. And I think ultimately they enjoy there is a social aspect that comes with working in an office space that some people prefer, and that's fine, but they're certainly just not cut out for the type of role that we require here. And of course, look, we find, Slack, a lot of the tools you're seeing today have just completely changed the dynamic of the remote workforce. We chat 3-4 times a week, just like this, on video calls. We meet once a year in person at an offsite. That last year was Lisbon, the year before was in Sydney. So we do a lot of things that bring us together in fun and ways that we want to meet and get together. But it's just it's non-traditional, right? Like it's not what the typical office space is used to.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's true as well. You have a certain time window where everyone sort of comes together at the same time. Yeah, so everyone kind of has their own work that they just do on their own time when it suits them. But you do have sort of set time where everyone is available. That's kind of a structure you have, isn't it?
Yeah, and you need to be really disciplined and smart about how you book like meetings. I think meetings are a killer, and I've always been, even when I was back in the agency days, I was very sensitive to booking any meeting and knowing the cost that comes with it and the inefficiencies that come with a bad meeting. So we're very militant when it comes to when you're booking a meeting, who's involved, what the agenda is, and when it is. I mean, we have again people across 5 different time zones. We have folks where it's 11 p.m. for them and 7 a.m. for the other person on the call. So there's dynamics there that you want to be mindful of. But just being smart about it, like being really efficient with the time you spend together, sending documents ahead of time, making sure folks are pre-reading, things that really make the time you spend together really smart and efficient and useful. And then you do get a kick out of it and makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, love it. So one thing I was curious to get your thoughts on is, because we kind of touched on it before, but a lot of startups do fail, and it's obviously a hard thing to do. And you've done well with Float. You've kind of the more I sort of research into your business, I just love the way you've set it up. You've kind of built it on your own terms. You haven't felt pressured to raise money to accelerate things. Everything just works well, which is awesome. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on why do you think a lot of startups do fail, and what can people do to, I guess, maximize their chances of success if they do start a startup?
Yep. You see it a lot. And look, I've worked in co-working spaces where, they're filled with folks with grand dreams, and a month later you never see them again. And look, I think a lot of it boils down to a couple of things. I think honestly, you really got to pick a problem that you love solving day in, day out for years, and being aware that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Those stories you read on TechCrunch or wherever about these amazing exits, they're not overnight stories. They're years of work. MailChimp 2001. Like companies that have been around for so long now, that appear successful now, but have been grinding it out for so long. And we did the same. 2012 we started. We've been grinding it out 4 years, long years where we weren't profitable or it didn't make sense, or folks would laugh at the concept or not believe it was a business. They thought it was a feature. And here we are, and we can start to be proud of the numbers, or we can start to be proud of some of our achievements. So yeah, pick a problem that you're happy getting up each day and solving without any concern for your folks' opinion on whether it's feasible today or whether it's going to be a business or a scalable enough business. There's plenty of VC folks that will tell you no, and they'll tell you it ain't a fit, or no, it ain't going to be a business, or there's X, Y, and Z company that are also doing this. So many folks have an opinion about why your business won't work. You've got to push through that and just and continue to see what you think is the problem that needs solving, and continue to do it year in, year out. So that's the first thing. I really encourage people to take a long-term view of their problem and solving it, and that's what we've been doing. The second thing is pick your founders carefully and really find those folks that you feel happy, like any relationship, going to work with each day. Good days, bad days, years where you won't make profit, or things don't look like they're going to make it, and be comfortable with that dynamic, and be comfortable calling people in the hard times, or calling people on bad work, or like going through difficult times, or family matters with those people over those years. It's a marathon, and there's very few people you can run a marathon with and get up each day and do it again the next day. And I've been very fortunate with Lars, my co-founder, and founders before that, Yaron, Joe. It's a tough dynamic. It's a very hard one to get right, because I've seen examples that are completely, like, I know a lot of co-founders where their dynamic is completely different to the dynamic me and Lars have. But it just, it needs to work for you. And I think finding those folks that complement you and bring out your strengths and cover your weaknesses, I think it's a magic thing when you can get that to work.
That's cool. Yeah, there's a few things you said there that resonated. I like the idea of taking the long view, and because you need, as you said, it's going to be hard times, there's going to be ups and downs. So it needs to be something you're at least interested enough in, or really want to solve that problem to be able to keep you going through tough times? Because if it's just something that you're jumping on a bandwagon, if it's like a really hot space or whatever, it's hard to keep that motivation going when the times are hard. But if you're really interested in the problem and love working towards that solution, then that's going to keep you going through those tough times. So I totally get that. So one thing I was curious about as well is that there are a few resource scheduling companies that are around these days. The sort of biggest one that comes to mind is like your Monday.com, for example. They've obviously gone a very different route to you. They've raised a lot of money. I see their ads popping up all over the place. So
Everyone's seen the ads, yeah.
So I'm curious how, first of all, do you even see them as a competitor? And if so, why is a customer going to go with you over someone like them?
Sure. Look, we see this a lot. We see Asana playing resource scheduling. We've seen Monday, call themselves resource scheduling. What you realize very quickly, particularly with these guys are extremely heavily funded. They need huge targets to hit. They need to be a lot of things to a lot of people. And so their product starts to reflect that. They start saying their project management, their resource scheduling, their timesheets, they're this, because they need to be, like, to get the type of returns they need to have any kind of return for their investors, they need to be a lot of things. And for a user, that's not also always what they want. They actually want a great resource scheduling tool that does one thing really well. And that's where we come in. We obsess over the concept of resource scheduling being a tool that you need to help run your agency or team. And we do that one thing really freaking well. We've been doing that since 2012, so we know how to do it really well, and we've learned a lot in that time. So folks can come in and they can say they're resource scheduling, and you can try Monday for resource scheduling, you can try Float for resource scheduling, and look, it's free to try, so you have at it, and you'll soon realize, like, there's a reason we continue to add customers despite new entrants, despite folks with virtually endless funding to advertise. It's because we do that one thing really well, and we'll continue to.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of finding that real specific niche that you can solve that problem for, rather than trying to be everything to everyone and be something to someone, as you said. So it makes sense to me. So one thing you mentioned before we actually started recording about habits and a habit planner book that I have, and so I was curious if you actually do have any sort of daily habits yourself that you do most days, or you try to do most days, things that have helped you, maybe in your business, maybe in your personal life, just any specific daily habits that have helped you?
Yeah, look, I do, and I think particularly with remote work, I think you need habits and you need repetition and you need a formula that gets you up each day and out of your pajamas and into the day. And so for me, it's very consistent. And folks are often like, "Oh, you work from home, you mustn't get out of your pajamas, and you must like take calls from your bed." And I'm like, no, actually, I get up at 7. I look after my now newborn baby Mara, and then I go get a coffee, usually with my wife. That's probably starting the day. Have a shower, and then I get on with the day. Like, fortunately, I have a lot of crossover with the US, which happens to be their evening. So I start with a lot of meetings generally, and I'm right into the day. And then, get a burst in the afternoon where there's not a lot of crossover with everyone, where I can get a lot of deep work done. So that sort of 3 to 4 hour period of uninterrupted work, where I'll tackle some of the bigger projects or the tougher problems or the bigger sort of product issues that we want to really dig into. And then I'll go to gym at about 5:30. And so trying to do the things make sense, but often just skip, trying to do those in repetition and in habit, I think is really critical and often underrated. And to your point, our habit planner, I think, makes total sense, because it's not a silver bullet. It's not a magic formula that you hear about these founders doing things that you can't do. It's really just down to the foundational things: eating well, sleeping well, working out, and doing those in repetition. I think is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I'm a big believer of that. And I heard as well you like a good fast-paced game of table tennis, which is so we'll have to go and have a hit at some point.
We should absolutely have a hit. Best game around.
Sounds good. Cool. Well, sort of coming up on the tail end of the interview here, Glenn. But just a few more quick questions. I was just curious, what's what's next for you and Float? You're obviously pretty well into the business now since 2012. Things have grown nicely. You're now living in Melbourne. What's next for you in the next 12 to 18 months?
Sure. Look, it's an interesting sort of over the last couple of years. We've just really seen a shift in my role and the company Float. Like we've gone from what was sort of 5 people and a small team of developers to now 16 people, and my role has shifted to really thinking about the company versus the product. And I think that's a role that you see a lot of founders go through, and it's something I'm sort of starting to adjust to, is thinking about the health of the company. How happy are the team members? How can we improve as a company? And being profitable now, we can start to call the shots. We can start to do things like having an offsite, in Portugal, or our tech team just flew down to Miami and had a meet there because it was, a great opportunity for them to figure out a problem we're having. So it's starting to think about what this company represents for our team, and it's been something I really enjoyed doing and will continue to do over the next 12 months. So it's sustainable, so it continues to be profitable, and so we can just start to, enjoy what we do and do it better. There's a lot of opportunity that we see. We haven't slowed. I think we're accelerating in our excitement to what we can achieve now with Float. And so never been more excited to work on it. And we'll continue to sort of double down on things that are working. This week we just launched our Android app. So we now have iOS and Android apps in market. And that's going to continue. So super excited about that. Super excited to spend a little bit of time with my baby girl, Mara, who's all of 10 weeks old. So building a company where I can do that, have the flexibility to do that that'll make me happy. And in 12 months later, if I'm still doing that, I'll be still happy.
Awesome. Love it. Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you, or anything that you really want to make sure you pass on to the audience before we finish up here, Glenn?
No, I think what you're doing is great. And I think, honestly, more folks, like, there's so much great information out there. And if folks are even half thinking about taking on an idea, or, they've been working that day job and never really put aside the time to go about solving that problem they always knew existed, just do it. Often I think people, there's so much fear in taking that leap, or some sort of lack of confidence, or, just an ability to push forward and do it. The worst that can happen is not always that as bad as people think, and so I just encourage people to go and try stuff. Honestly, go out and do it. Give it a shot. If the worst thing is in 6 months later you're going back to a job you were previously at, or looking for another job, that ain't so bad. And honestly, you'll be better for it, because I think if Float failed tomorrow, the experience I've learned and experience I've gone through over the past few years, I couldn't have got any job at any place I worked at in the 15 years before that. It was something, that's been just remarkable from an experience perspective, that I think people underrate. They look very closely at, did I make money, or was it profitable? There's a life experience there that I think people really should get out and experience.
I love it. It's a great message. Just get out there and try it. The worst case is usually not as bad as you think. So.
Usually not as bad.
Sometimes. No, I love it. Well, what's the best way to connect with you, Glenn? If someone listens to this and they like what you're all about, they just want to say thank you for coming on the show today, what's the best way for someone to connect?
Yeah, usually pretty easy to find. You can shoot me an email at glenn@float.com, so that's GLENN @float.com. You can follow me at Twitter. I'm at GlennFloat, so GLENN Float. And shoot me a mail. Look, I think, like you've done, James, I think a lot of folks just don't realize you can reach out to folks sometimes, and they're usually really happy to help if you come at them with the right questions and are respectful of their time. So certainly happy to if folks are interested.
Awesome. Well, this was great. I really enjoyed this conversation, Glenn. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's fascinating to see the journey you've had with Float. As I mentioned before, I think I really respect the way you built your business. It's just the way you've gone about it. You've kept things tight and just like built your lifestyle around it as well, and it allows you to do the things you want to do. And I just think it's awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what you've learned over the past years building Float.
Appreciate it, James, and thanks for putting on this podcast, mate. It's good work.
Thank you so much. And everyone listening, make sure you go check out Glenn. send him a message, say thanks for coming on the show, and have a great day, everyone.